Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial is set correctly to USA Prepares. Kyle's engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. We broadcast 2 hours from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains. And if you'd like to call us, we'll pay for the call. 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. And the telephone listen line is up and running. 605-477-3249. 605-477-3249. Rich Scheben's with us. Welcome, Rich Scheben.
Well, thank you, Vincent Finelli. How are you doing this morning?
Very, very well. Very well. And, we've got a lot of things to talk about. Why don't you go first?
Well, I think people are starting to wake up to the fact, Vince, that the left-right paradigm, the so-called ideology, the philosophy, is not the plan the elite said it was. And I'm just looking at one article here. U.S. foreclosures rise for first time in 36 months. And this is basically an end of August, early September report when everything is supposed to be selling and people are moving and people are heading towards retirement. And retirement's turning out for many to be a fiasco because they don't have enough money saved and they have too much debt. In fact, Americans aged 65 to 74 have seen a 204% surge in bankruptcy filings. So going back to this left-right paradigm that I talked about a moment ago, do you remember, Vince, years ago when they were pulling this charade and saying, the left is, part of the divide and conquer strategy, the chaos, the infighting, the me versus them. You remember when the left said, that we were against big corporations, them taking advantage of the little guy. And the right was so-called against big government taking advantage of the little guy. Well, people can see now it's the aristocracy versus the serfs. And you look at big tech, the big banks, big pharma, big Wall Street, big insurance. A lot of these, most of these have been bailed out because they're too big to fail and too big to jail by the little people who are broke, who are now traveling around in campers and becoming semi-nomadic because they had to sell their house and get a little bit of equity to get out of debt in order to pull off some type of means of retirement and going from, poor man's job to poor man's job. So people are waking up to the fact that this is all false, phony, theater. It's all designed to manufacture perception, pity, guilt, and ideology, which is what the mainstream media talking heads are bought and paid for, to divide us by race, gender, sex, religion, ideology. And even now you can see so much effort for the distractions to be put against the old people and blame the old people for the woes of the young people. Even though, like the statistic I just mentioned to you about foreclosure rates, and Americans aged 65 to 74, a.k.a. baby boomers, are seeing a 204% surge in bankruptcy filings. So it's pretty obvious that it's very, very little left-right paradigm and much more the aristocracy managing and controlling the serfs. And that's why they use group identity politics. And I'm going to go into my stand for principle rant right now, which I'm going to try to remember to mention this on the air every time. And there's three simple criteria. The first is the same rules, laws, and accountability for everybody. Right now in America, we have a different set of rules, laws, and accountability based on what group you come from. Well, as long as we lower the bars of standards and expectations, especially for getting a job, We're rewarding mediocrity, destroying America from within, and turning our nation into a law of diminishing returns. And words like opportunity, knowledge, ingenuity, productivity, innovation, this is only going to be available for the superpower elites, because you don't empower a nation, a group, or an individual by lowering the bars of standards and expectations. Second is truth. Truth is truth. Truth is free speech. Truth is truth. Truth is objective facts. Basically, you have to have the guts to be willing to say the truth in lieu of wanting to be hated for blowing smoke up people's ass, or love for blowing smoke up people's ass. Pardon me. And the last one is if somebody, because of their group, has less consequences for their behavior, you get to do it too. Because group identity politics, a.k.a. victim group status, a.k.a. protectionist group status, a.k.a. identity politics. And this is how the elite want to label this strategy, as identity politics, because they don't want the people waking up to the fact that we are being distracted, dumbed down, and divided by groups. And I think people, Vince, are now waking up to this fact. And what's really scary, what big tech has done, along with the George Soroses, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, basically owning so many of these voting booths, these electronic voting booths, saying that everything is hate speech. Basically, if you're on the left, you can say that a woman looks like she's been down on her knees too long, like what they did to Kellyanne Conway. The left can rape all they want. They can do pedophilia all they want. But if you're on the right, and God forbid you make a move that's inappropriate, you are going to be labeled a rapist. And Kavanaugh is going through all this. So we are living in a Twilight Zone episode where nothing matters but what group we are in. And going back to what I said about this left-right paradigm, Vince, let me ask you, do you remember the days, it wasn't that long ago, when the left were so-called proponents of big government and against big corporations, and now we see what big tech, the big banks, and big pharma, and big Wall Street, big insurance, all these big outfits are doing, and yet the left is defending them. And this is why I say we have a fascist system, where the big corporate oligarchies have basically created an alliance with big government. And the little people, not only can they not compete in a commerce fashion, but they're losing more and more ground, as per just a few examples I gave today. Vince?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that the left and the right are pro-big business. And the proof is simple. Verizon, T-Mobile, Zuckerberg, Apple. I mean, you look at all the companies that are growing, at least allegedly growing, they are in bed with the government. No question about it. And you look at companies like General Motors, who manufacture vehicles with faulty ignition switches that cause cars to crash. And they aren't taken to task. They get away with it because they do the analysis. They bring in the accountants. And the accountants say, you know what? I think we might be just better off working with the lawyers and fighting individual lawsuits for people who have been killed with our vehicles rather than replacing the ignition switches. Or the accountants get involved and say, you know what? A good ignition switch might cost $8, but we can make a substandard one, and we'll get some people killed, but that'll be okay, for $6. So let's go with the $6 route and save the money. Or the accountants say, you know what? We have an oil filter that holds a quart of oil. And every new car that goes down the production line, we've got to put 5 quarts of oil in. But you know what? If we make that oil filter smaller, we can save a half a quart of oil. Now, okay, the engines will probably wear out a little faster, but that's okay because we're going to save a half a quart of oil. And won't that be great for ecology? Because we're going to be saving all that oil. And in the reality of the situation is putting a smaller, cheaper, junky oil filter on will cause the engines to wear out faster, which will cause more destruction to the planet because we're going to be throwing away vehicles because the engines fail prematurely. Unbelievable. So I keep using the word accountants. And really, the elite The guys who are at the top and the gals who are at the top, I believe, are using the accountants, saying, you know what, we can promote you guys if you just come up with ways to save more money, so we, the elite, can make more money, the little guys make less money, and the customers, who cares about the customers? I think that's what's happening. I really do.
Yeah, well, we're in a big old bubble for everything, and as credit, and we all have read recently, and I've talked about this in great detail, about the yield curves being close to inversion. And as they become more and more narrow and or flattened, depending on what term you want to use, we can see that credit is actually collapsing. And we have corporate debt-funded buybacks, stock buybacks, which has warped all the PE ratios, the price-to-sales ratios, which are a record high. Basically, everything, every unit of measure and calculation has become a bubble, and every book is cooked. So when credit bubbles are basically now for the creation of employment, and they're a fuel for malinvestment, wealth destruction for the bottom 93%, a.k.a. the little guy, with basically creation of wealth for the super wealthy. And I've talked about stock buybacks and QE in great detail over the past year. And this proves it's not class envy. And again, folks, I can't say this enough. Quantitative easing, or QE, 95% of that money gets printed out of thin air by pressing buttons and goes to the top 1 to 7%. The great majority of that money goes to the top 1 to 2%. And stock buybacks are just a tool so the wealthy executives in corporations who have eliminated their core businesses, in other words, they go out, they issue debt, they sell it to some poor sucker who's touting a triple B bond rating. So they're selling their debt so they can borrow more money, so they can buy more outstanding shares of stock, which raises the price so they can sell their personal stock options for a heck of a profit without putting money into employment, without putting money into R&D, without putting money into goods and services. So when this happens, not only are they manufacturing inflation, but they're feathering their own nest. And basically the little guy is getting squeezed out and their options are dwindling. And this is why, Vince, we need to bring up the fact that people need to go out, buy some land, super wealthy, or buy land hand over fist. The little guy needs to do this.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Rich, the two words Twilight Zone keep coming up on USA Prepares. And so for those who haven't heard of what the Twilight Zone was, it was an Emmy Award winner, Rod Serling, who wrote probably, I think, 80, or at least 80 episodes of The Twilight Zone, of which there were about 150 episodes. And the first episode aired in 1958, and it ran through 1964. It was on the CBS network, and the creator's name was Rod Serling, Serling. And it was a mixture of, it was strange, mixture of horror, science fiction, comedy, superstition, drama. It was all bundled together, and it really made you think, this is pretty twisted. And we have here at the farm probably most of the episodes on VHS tape. And you might want to try watching some of these, class. It's an eye opener, and this was from the 1950s. Okay, Rich, you were talking about how 65 to 74-year-olds, the increase in bankruptcy filings has gone up 204% in recent times, and I understand that. And I actually see that. We talked to a gal yesterday who was interested in buying something new, okay? But not for a lot of money, for, let's say, $2,000. but couldn't do it because the family just bought some tires. So buying tires can put an extreme dent in a family's budget. Now think about that, class. Buying tires. Now, we all buy tires, right? Anyone who has a vehicle has bought tires. It just happens. Tires wear out. And sometimes they blow out. Sometimes they get destroyed because you're riding on too little air pressure and you need new tires. Well, buying 4 tires really put a dent in a family's budget. And so when you keep hearing that the economy is doing well and it's roaring and it's booming and the stock market's going up, up, up into the stratosphere, it's not possible to do that without manipulation. It's not possible to do that without customers. If you're a company that sells things, you can be a manufacturing company, but you still need customers. If you're a retail operation, you still need customers. But the customers are becoming more and more broke. And the proof of this is just go to any mall and you'll see an absence of customers. So how is it possible that the economy is roaring and booming and people are broke? So you come to the realization that what Rich Scheben is saying is absolutely correct. Let me give you an example. So I've been teaching a class for the last 3 weekends here at the farm, a very small class, one student. And this particular student also is a USA Prepares instructor. And he's selling a camper, a used camper. He's had it about, I'll say 10 years. Used it a few times, doesn't need it anymore. And our family knows someone who is looking for a place to live. So our family has introduced buyer and seller. And so now we have a family that needs a place to live that's going to move into this camper. And our instructor wanted it perfect, absolutely perfect in every respect. And so he and I have spent 3 days, 1 day per weekend, for 3 weekends, working on this. For example, making sure the heating system was operational and efficient. Making sure the refrigeration system would run on 12 volts as well as propane. Making sure the hot water heater system worked on propane. Making sure the lighting worked on 12 volts as well as with the inverter. Making sure it had no leaks. Making sure the tires were inflated right. Making sure the hitch was right. Making sure all the connections were perfect with no corrosion. And it took 3 days. But we've got a family that's going to move into that. So we're talking about this camper. And I know what it's like to live in a camper. Back in 2005, 2006, when we were building our farmhouse, one of our instructors let us use his camper. He was not an instructor at the time. He was the realtor who sold us the farm. And he said to me, "So where are Ewans going to live while you build the house?" And I said, "Well, I'm not really sure at this point." He said, "I hop in my truck," and he put my son and me in his truck, and he drove out to his farm and hooked his truck up to his camper and brought it over to our farm. So our son and I, when we were building this house, lived in this 20-foot camper. And we lived on the end of an extension cord. The camper was cold in the winter. No air conditioning. We cooked on a hot plate. It didn't have plumbing that worked. So we would shower on the end of a garden hose. We put the garden hose in the sun, and it would warm up during the day, and then we would take a mist kind of a shower in the backyard. So this camper that this family is going to end up with is way better than a tent. It's way better than the pioneers had it. And it's way better than wasting money on an apartment. And so what this young family is going to be doing is living in this camper and saving money. And when they're ready, they can have some equity in the camper. They can sell the camper and move on to something more permanent. But this is symptomatic of what's happening in the United States. This is symptomatic of the economy. And so let's say you have a job. I know a young boy who is actually in his 20s, mid-20s, maybe 26, and he's working in a factory, and they make things. But they make things for another customer, let's say a tractor manufacturer. So if the tractor manufacturer needs these bent, stamped, punched-out parts, when the tractor manufacturer calls his company, says, okay, we need 1,000 of those parts, then he gets to work. If they don't need the parts, the boss says, okay, you're only working 3 days this week. So he really never knows how much his paycheck is going to be because it's based on hours, X dollars per hour. And he may have full-time work, he may have overtime work, and he may have no work for weeks. It happens. So that's what's happening to America. The stability seems to be vanishing quickly. The loyalty from a company to their employees is gone. And the employees realize that, you know what? The company's not loyal to us, so why should we be loyal to them? So now there's no loyalty. It's a horrible situation. It's not the same situation that I grew up with in the 1950s and the 1960s, where you could work hard, prove that you could do it, prove that you're willing to grow, prove that you can grow, prove that you had more knowledge, more skills, and you could rise within that company. Now, if you're really good at it, you get to train your replacements from a foreign country. Hey, Tom, you're the best. You're the best we got. I want you to train Ahmed and teach him everything you know. Oh, yeah, Ahmed is going to do what you're doing. We pay him less, and pretty soon you're going to be fired, maybe 2 weeks. That's the kind of stuff that's happening in the United States. Rich?
Yeah, absolutely. And basically what we've been allowing the last, especially 20 years, we've allowed the elite to poison us against ourselves. And I can give millions of examples, but the number one example is the lowering of the bars of standards for getting a job and keeping a job. This is just economic 101. When you can't separate yourself from the pack for getting a job based on hard work, effort, proven results, qualifications, all the criteria I talk about, that means you're basically a serf for life. It basically means that you are in a caste system for life. When the game gets so rigged that central bank, corrupt monetary policies, Keynesian economics, group identity politics, along with our demographic structure, is getting to the point where they're setting us up with rewarding of mediocrity for the new industry, which is going to be robotics, automation, and artificial intelligence. And when this technocracy takes hold, they're going to be able to control prices for everything. You know, right now we're in a stagflationary, deflationary spiral. But if they keep with the money printing and keep with the subsidies and more of the, not just the BRICS nations, but other nations around the world aren't using the so-called petrodollar, world reserve currency, and there's a continuing of special interest lobbying and PAC because the big corporations are so big that they could basically buy out our Congress, our lawyers, our judges, all the politicians, and the bankers, then there's no hope for the little guy. And right before the last break, I was talking about possibly looking into buying rural land. And I know I've harped on this a few times, but I haven't talked about this in a little bit of little bit at a time, because I ask everybody to read Alinsky, Marx, Cloward and Piven, the Frankfurt School, the Communist Manifesto. Basically, they've used group identity politics and other tools of political correctness that the American people are drunk on that Kool-Aid to set the stage for government and corporate interventions. Basically, redistribution, confiscation of our wealth to give to the very elite. All this adds up to a loss of individual rights. And they want to make us as submissive and break our will as much as possible. So I want to just shift gears for a moment here and talk about all you people, especially parents and grandparents, never mind just students who are in so much debt for school loans that they can't even, when they get out of school, get a decent job, pay those loans off, so they're missing out on establishing equity and putting principal or equity in your pocket by buying a home. Instead, they have to rent, which makes the snowball get larger going downhill, and they can't get ahead. So I wish more people would break away from this cookie-cutter follower politically correct subdivision mentality, and that includes apartments, townhouses, and condos and everything, and start thinking about moving rural. Because with all this corruption, manipulation, nepotism, I don't see how the little guy can control their own destiny. Think about, instead of putting money into college where 90% of the degrees are worthless, what about grandparents and parents putting money into a homestead, a little pioneering, and teach skill sets, teach adventure, freedom, liberty, curiosity, growing a garden, no GMO produce, alternative energy, raising animals, hunting and fishing, preserving foods, whether you live off-grid or not. I think this is a time in history that when all these books that are cooked and everything is shown, things are going to collapse very quickly. And I think what we need to do is regain some of those lost 19th century skills, but dovetail them with 21st century technology. And look at the variety that having a little bit of land offers, even if it's 5 acres, depending on what you can afford. I'm a big proponent myself of the 4 seasons, so that's why I like Montana. And it's not just for the hunting and fishing. It's for the variety of lifestyle that changes with seasonality, whether it be hunting your own meat, catching your own fish, growing your own produce, harvesting firewood for the winter. To me, living in a winter environment offers a blessing in the sense that you're always thinking with foresight. And I haven't said this in a while either, but one of the best pool players, shooting pool on a pool table, and the best chess players have in common. They can look 2, 3, 4, 5 moves ahead. Living in an environment that has a winter gives you the ability to think with foresight and act with foresight. But it also gives you a variety of having every day, or at least every season, being a different plan of action and daily chores or living, especially with what's coming down the road with this new technocracy. Because it's very obvious that the powers that be want to reduce population. And they have an addiction to power, money, and control, and they don't want to lose it. So what can we do to start thinking outside the box, gain skill sets, have variety, control our own destiny a little more? And I can't think of anything better for the little guy to buy a piece of land. For those of you who say, well, I only have a few $1,000s to spare, well, this is why the powers that be are distracting, dumbing down, and dividing us by group, because they need to keep us divided. They need to have us infighting, and they need to have chaos. They don't want Tom, Dick, and Harry, Jane, and Sue to get together and say, hey, I have a backhoe, I'm a builder, I know how to put together a solar array, I'm a great gardener and hunter and fisherman, I know how to preserve food, I know edible and medicinal plants, I know this, I know that. They don't want people creating a database and people getting together and saying, hey, let's do it. Now, it's not hard as long as you sit down at the table and pre-negotiate. Everything needs to be on paper. And what I mean by that is you get into a room and you decide who has what capital resources, who has what skill sets, and you decide 5, 10 years, or 2 years down the road after you sell the property, who gets what of the equity. And we can talk a little more about that after the break, man.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. Rich Scheben, offgridmontana.com. So, Rich Scheben, you were talking about the family working together as a unit, a productive unit. And that's the way to go. That's the way our family operates right here at the farm. We all work together, we plan together, and we all pull in the same direction. And we try really hard not to make mistakes. So we avoid making mistakes because we all work together. It's not like a bunch of people living in a building all going our own way and then coming back, maybe at the end of the day and not talking to each other. That's not what happens. We literally communicate. We literally work together. Everybody pulls his own weight. And that's how our farm operates. And because of that, I'm allowed to spend a couple hours a day behind the microphone because everybody's pulling his own weight. And they cover for me, so I can do this. I can be a volunteer here. Please continue, Rich.
Yeah, well, you got to look at a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes, which a lot of the patriots have been undercovering a lot of this purging data, book burning, treason, racketeering, censoring of speech rights, freedoms, the so-called justice that we have in this country where it's only for what group you're in. You look at the Googles and the Apples selling out to China. You look at the Swiss National Bank owning over $100 billion of U.S. stocks and bonds. Basically, the Fed and all these central banks are creating a so-called wealth effect on paper, but not economic growth. And I got to mention a few statistics here because this is why I use financial, economic, social, and political rationale as evenly as possible so we can connect the dots and make sense why I'm saying this stuff. GM pays 4.1% dividend yield, yet their cash flow is negative. Yeah, that's real healthy. The 2-10 Treasury yield, I just talked about that earlier, the spread is in the teens for basis points. Last time this happened was in 2007. So obviously the whole economic situation is smoke and mirrors. Companies like Coca-Cola is paying its investors more money than it generates business. Think about that. They just go into more and more debt. So as these illusions are getting more common for a lot of companies, it's just like the Wall Street Journal, not too long ago, says 60% of corporate debt issued by the Russell 2000 is rated as junk. And 25% of Russell 2000 firms don't make money. So, excuse me, when you have PE ratios higher than before the Great Depression and the big tech censorship surveillance, things even in articles like likes, followers, and comments and search results, everything is manipulated. This is why I say we live in a Twilight Zone episode, a 1984 Orwellian episode. This is why I urge people to read at least certain big points about Cloward and Piven and the Communist Manifesto and Marx and Alinsky, and you can really see how they're following, the elite are following a script that's been down on paper for years. But the unit of measures of despair, folks, when you look at drug use, obesity, divorce rates, depending on who you read, as high as 75%, suicides, alcoholism, every measure, unit of measure or calculation regarding despair is not heading in a positive direction. And this is why I urge people to really think about buying some land. And people say, gardening's a lot of work. Well, hunting and butchering's a lot of work. I just shot a 4-point buck yesterday evening with my bow, and right after this radio show, I'm going to butcher it, okay, by myself right off the tailgate of my truck. And then we're going to keep it on ice, and then we're going to can it in a few days. So, this is part of a lifestyle. Harvesting garden produce is part of a lifestyle. Taking care of the chickens and the goats is part of a lifestyle. Living frugally is part of a lifestyle. Gathering wood. Now, it all depends on how rugged you want to live. You know, I have a 675 amp hour system, which is on the small side, but it's very doable in a glamping situation, how we live. And I'll get into a little more details after the break. And, boy, these breaks come up quick.
You know, there's shortages all over the country, but we don't have shortages of breaks. Rich Sheben's with us, right. offgridmontana.com, and I'm interested to hearing more about living frugally. And that's what we do here at USA Prepares. We live frugally, we lead by example, and we hope that you'll join in our lifestyle and buy a farm. We'll be right back. All set? Cocked, locked, hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Rich Sheben's with us, off-grid Montana. We've been talking about living frugally, saving money, living below your means, avoiding borrowing money, and avoiding paying needless interest, and avoiding buying things just because you've got an impulse to buy things, doing things with a plan, being proactive. And that's kind of what we do. Rich, please continue.
Yeah, well, think of the debt load that we have in America, the headwinds of the credit crisis that I talked about earlier, the pensions, the valuations, the changing of definitions, the future rates of growth. When I say debt, I don't just mean household debt. I mean government promises, corporate, global. You know, the game is so rigged that all the little guy can do is speculate and hedge and throw a dart at a dartboard and hope for something a whirlwind to happen, because everything is manipulated and corrupt. So going back to buy land, pardon me?
I had a question for you. Mm-hmm. You know, you have asked me for months, if I had an extra $5,000, an extra $50,000, maybe even more, you know, let's say it's a windfall kind of a thing, what would I do with it? So my question for you is, what would you do with it?
Well, let me go ahead and answer that. If I was somewhere in the bottom 93% of income, which I am, and I didn't have my little hobby farm, I'm going to answer this for the people and not for myself, because I have my little hobby farm, and I am out of debt. And this is why I do these talks and these radio shows, is to try to give ideas and solutions to the little guy to help the people. Because the people are not represented. They're not underrepresented. They're not represented. They don't have any restitution or protection under the law. So if I had a little extra money, and before I even answer that, folks, but think about the covenants that you have, the homeowners associations, where some people in some subdivisions can't cut trees or can't have chickens, or definitely can't have a rooster because they crow too loud, or you can't, cook some sausages in your fire pit in your backyard because it's illegal, or you got to paint certain colors of your house because it's in the covenants. Is it really, when you look at the value, you look at the increase in taxes and insurance going up in these cookie-cutter, politically correct subdivision mentality areas, do you consider this to be freedom? So answering your question, Vince, what I would do is get together with like-minded people and literally look at the next 2, 5, 10 years, depending on how you pioneer a piece of land. You park it out, you take out some trees, you build the main house, you build a couple cabins, you build a barn or garage, you build a garden, you put a garden fence around it to keep the critters out, you put in your fire pit, you put in your gazebo, you make a little pasture for your hobby animals, and you basically set up a paradise of self-sufficiency living where the new owners, not just yourself, can enjoy the freedom, the liberty, the adventure. You gain skill sets. You cross-train one another. You have a great organic lifestyle. So for those of you who say, oh, my electricity bill is too big, well, make it an off-grid property where you can literally learn alternative energy, what type of land to buy. I always talk about buy as much variety as possible, ridge draws, northern slopes, southern slopes, We have different types of edible medicinal plant, wildlife, places for them to hide, different types of natural resources. Could be surface water, could be trees, could be a good aquifer underneath the ground, rock, gravel. You can tier your garden. It doesn't have to be flat. You can tier it on a southern slope. Beware of the term usable land, because all land is usable. And the more varied topography you have around you, less chance of somebody subdividing that and turning into a subdivision, because they need more flat land to put in more septic and drain fields. So for those of you who complain about, oh, this neighbor, I don't like my neighbor, get 100, 200 yards away from that neighbor. Raise some animals. Learn hunting and fishing strategies. Learn how to can and preserve your food. You have a neighbor complain to call the cops because you want to shoot your gun once in a while? Well, if you own a little bit of land, that shouldn't happen. Relearn the Constitution and teach it to your people close to you. Learn about economy and financial counseling. Edible and medicinal plants, I've given so many tours on that. I love botany. I love nature. People who are just, the average American spends 7 to 8 hours on their TV per day and their smartphone. That's unacceptable. Nutrition. If people lived off the land, they could relearn nutrition. How many people are complaining about some of the stuff that the Alinsky types, the Marxist types, are teaching in public schools? Well, if you have some land, you can homeschool your kids. Teach them how to garden. I can't tell you how many tours I've given in my garden. People are hungry for this information. People want to do it. People are afraid to do it. And people have been distracted, dumbed down, and divided by groups. The powers that be do not want us getting together and giving solutions. Why do you think all these covenants in suburban America says you can't have a garden in your front yard? Oh, because it's too ugly, they say. No, it's not. They don't want you to have a garden in your front yard because they don't want your neighbors passing by and saying, "Hey, what's that vegetable? Hey, how do you make your soil? Where's your compost pile? What's the maturity of this particular vegetable? Does this vegetable work well with this vegetable, or is it in competition?" They don't want people teaching each other. They don't want people learning each other, because if everybody had a garden in their front yard, neighbors would be more neighborly. They would interact. They would communicate again. That's just a small example. And we cannot allow the powers that be to divide us. And they're dividing us from every group imaginable, because they want to keep us poor. They want to keep us submissive. They want to break your will. And they don't want to teach you self-sufficiency at all. We have a choice. Get together with like-minded people, whether it be family, like Vince says, or friends. Start a database. Somebody could actually start this business out of their office in their house and literally bring people together. And you have someone like a Vincent Finelli or a Rich Scheben, and I've done this many times, talking to people over the phone, giving ideas and solutions on what type of land to buy, and you get together. Again, everything is pre-negotiated at the table. So if Tom, Dick, and Harry, Sue, and Jane get together, you put your skill sets down. You put your capital resources down, i.e. your money. And you decide, depending on labor and who puts in the most money and labor and time and effort, walks away with, and this is all pre-negotiated, so when you sell that hobby farm, everybody, Tom, Dick, and Harry, Sue, and Jane, walk away with a pre-negotiated percentage. And who knows, maybe you can have a clause in there where one person can buy another person out, or multiple people out. You can do anything you want. This is your contract. This is your land. So for people who can't afford to buy a piece of land, there's other ways to do it. And it sure beats renting, because when you rent, you literally throw your money out the window. You're not putting anything into equity. That's why all these kids who are graduating from college, where 90% of the college degrees are worthless, and the same people who are telling you to go to college and go into debt are taking their companies outside the country and are basically doing stock buybacks where they're not putting money into employees, into research and development, or into goods and services, are telling you to do this while they're making themselves wealthier And they're manufacturing inflation in a situation where the little people has a chance to catch up in a deflationary environment. But no, they have to constantly use Keynesian economics and the corrupt monetary policies of the central banks to create inflation, again artificially, through manipulation and corruption. And they're telling you to keep going to college, to keep getting into debt. Well, what if the 90% of people who live in urban, suburban America, just some of you, decided to go rural? It doesn't have to be Missouri, it doesn't have to be Montana, wherever you want. And people say, well, I don't want to leave my family. This is one of the big objections I get. Well, let me tell you something. I've done a little research in that arena. And it's amazing how much little time people and families who live one town away spend with each other. If you went to a cool place and had a hobby farm and you were self-sufficient, I guarantee you're going to have so many neighbors and friends and relatives coming to visit you, and people who hear about you, trust me on this one, that not only are you going to be so busy giving the tours and showing people what you've done, but you're going to be teaching people and giving them ideas and solutions and spending 5 times more time with your family who says, I don't want you leaving the area, because they're going to come and visit, and they're going to spend days when they come and visit and spend way more hours allocated per year than they spend with you on holidays at home. Guarantee it. Guarantee it. And what if something goes bad, financially, economically, socially, and politically? What if? Your family has a place to go. You can look at it as a bug-out survival property. You can look at it as a lifestyle property. You can look at it as a retirement property. You can look at it as just a new strategy in your particular life. But think about from the adventure years that we all have, okay? Now, coming from a man, hunting and fishing and all that, people look at what's really my adventure years. Do I want to really retire late in life and then be able to do all these things I thought about doing, and then I don't have enough energy or strength to do it? What is your adventure years? Is it 50, 55, 60? I don't know. But think about being a someday I'll and always thinking about pulling the trigger on a certain dream and not doing it. Because we are regressing as a society. And group identity politics is one of the biggest reasons for lowering the bars of standards and expectations for a job, which has created absolutely no appreciation or value in this job. So self-sufficiency is the only thing left I see for the little people, Vince.
I love that expression, someday I'll. Someday I'll. That's a coulda, shoulda, woulda. And we've been talking about someday I'll, coulda, shoulda, woulda, when I get around to it. And also homeowners associations. And I can tell you that we have a family member who lives in a homeowners association property. And she got a threatening letter from the homeowners association. The threat included a fine because the window screens on the front of the house weren't all there and did not match. I want you to think about that. So there are windows in the front of the house facing the road, and the threat was that the window screens are not all matching, and some were missing. So she responded, okay, can you show me a picture of what you're talking about? Because I don't get it. So they sent a picture of the house with the window screens not matching, some missing. And that picture was taken before she bought the house, previous owner. And she said, why don't you come look for yourself? And sure enough, all the window screens matched, and they were all in place. And they had been throughout the ownership of this family member. So here you have, something as ridiculous as that. The Homeowners Association is saying you will be fined for not having matching screens and not having all the screens on your windows. Who wants to live like that? Now, it was an error, right? Maybe that's what you call a clerical error, where somebody complains or somebody doesn't do the research. How can you threaten a homeowner and say that here is the violation without somebody actually going out there and looking? Well, that's what happens. We have proof of this. I don't want to live like that. I don't want to live in an environment where the neighbors are telling on other neighbors. I just am not interested in that. It's petty. Well, Rich, you talked about thinking and foresight. And that reminds me that I have never owned a vehicle that didn't have some kind of vibration. And I'm talking about vibration that you can feel in the seat, the driver's seat, the passenger seat, the gear shift knob, or the steering wheel. Every vehicle I've owned has had some kind of vibration. And where I'm going with this is, it used to be that farmers would share things and would help each other. So, for example, one guy would have a hay mower. We'll call it a sickle bar mower. And another guy might have a hay rake. And another farmer might have a hay baler. And they would each own a piece of equipment, and one guy might own a tractor. And they would combine their resources, work together, and cut and rake and bale hay. We don't do that anymore, for the most part. We don't work together. Well, getting back to that out of balance situation or the vibration situation, I had it with that. I had it with bringing my tires and wheels to a guy to get them balanced, and it never was right. And I couldn't prove it because I didn't have a balancer. So I ended up buying a used wheel tire changer, rust-colored, top of the line, made by a company called Coates. The model is 7060AX. It's a great machine, but it's rust-colored. And I bought it for very little money. And then I bought a wheel balancer, top of the line, John Bean. It's Snap-on. And I want to tell you why I did it, and I want to tell you why I know what I know based on first-hand experience. And this gets back to farmers working with each other, sharing equipment, those kinds of things. We'll be right back. Very quickly, I'd like to finish this story, and then we've got Bob in Michigan. So now our village has a tire changing machine and a wheel balancer. So farmers can help each other. And we're trying to show how to do this by example. Now, I mentioned that I haven't owned a vehicle that did not have vibration. And it was frustrating because no matter when or where I took our wheels or tires, it never was right. So I decided that's it. I've had it. And I'm just going to get our own tire changing machine. And I'm going to get our own tire balancer. And I'm going to do it myself, and I'm going to do it right. Because back in the 1970s, when I was an automotive mechanic at Sears, Roebuck and Company, I knew how to do it. I was taught how to do it. So I can change tires and balance wheels and tires. Well, so we bought this tire balancer, wheel balancer, and I wanted to set it up, put it in the location I wanted, and I wanted to calibrate it. Now, this particular machine, you can calibrate yourself. It's one of the early models that would let the owner or the operator or the mechanic or the technician balance the machine himself or herself. So he didn't have to call that factory that manufactured it and have them send out a technician for I don't know how many hundreds of dollars to have them calibrate it. You could calibrate it yourself, and there was a tool to do that. And that tool is called a slug, S-L-U-G, and it's a weight of a specific diameter and length, and it's a very precise tool. So what you do is you thread this into the hub, and you put some codes into the keypad, and you run it through the diagnostics. So you balance it, or you calibrate it to the left, you calibrate it vertically, and you calibrate it to the right. And when you're done, the machine is set so that you can now balance tires properly. Well, the slug goes into a specific threaded hole, actually 2 holes. And the holes were gunked up. And to me, it looked like they hadn't been used in years, like 10 years. So I'm estimating that this machine had not been calibrated years. Now, where'd this machine come from? It came from one of 2 places, either Walmart or Sam's Club. And that's what I was told when I bought it. It came from one of those 2 places, and it was sold at a liquidation auction when they were getting new equipment. So they sold this older machine in favor of buying a new machine. Well, I'm telling you, I don't believe it had been calibrated in years and years and years. So anybody who was using it probably had a machine that was not calibrated, and even if they were balancing the tires properly, they probably weren't balanced because the machine wasn't calibrated. So what I'm saying is this kind of explains why, in one example, why I've never had a vehicle free of vibration, because either the calibration wasn't done on the wheel balancer, or it's good enough. We'll just leave it, even though it needs more weights, or the weights are not in the proper position. It's close enough, but it wasn't close enough. It's never been close enough, and I have been, we'll use Joey's word, bragging to our instructors when I talk to them off the air. I balanced our tires. I haven't seen one yet that was balanced properly before we got this machine. Not one. Not one tire or wheel has been done right. And when I balance them right and put them back on the car, I can't believe it. It's like a new car because the wheels are now balanced the way they should be. So we're taking shortcuts. We're not paying attention. We've lowered the bars and standards, as Rich Scheben has said. And now I keep saying over and over on the phone or in person to our instructors, look, if you want to do it right, you have to do it yourself, because I haven't seen any vehicle yet that has been repaired properly. Not one that's been repaired properly by a shop. Not one. Bob in Michigan, welcome. You're on with Rich Scheben and me, Vin Finelli.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about a good mechanic is worth their weight in gold.
Well, Bob, all right, do you disagree or agree with what I've been saying?
Oh, no, I can see that. Yeah, that a lot of times equipment is not kept up to the proper operating standards. And, it's like a foundation built on sand.
Right, you are. How can we help you, Bob?
Well, your guest was talking about acquiring land to, kind of homestead and so forth. I've been looking to try and get some land, some property here in Michigan for quite some time now. And so I'm calling in to kind of put a feeler out if there's any other people here in Michigan that would be interested. They want to get a hold of me, and maybe we can put something together and set up a homestead like that. And I can bring my business in, and they'll have jobs, and we can all get by that way. Because I'm throwing away $10,000 a year on rent right now. I'd rather be putting it into equity into some property somewhere. So, and I found some great deals, but it's always there's always some obstacle in the way of getting something. Seems like so.
Bob, let's do it this way.
That's probably, when you talk about $10,000, that's probably net. In other words, you're paying your rent with cash. So that means you have to earn more gross in order to throw money out the window. Now, we're in this era of pushing buttons, managing paper, and being politically correct. People always ask me, well, what are the wealthy investing in right now? Right now, the wealthy, I've been reading, they're investing in land and acreage 3 times heavier than they ever have. That's almost an absolute term. Now, when Vince was talking about sharing, think about the old days of sharecropping. Think about today how we can be sharing landowners, cross-training, creating a lifestyle of independence and healthier living. And you see every example that ever comes up over recent history where people try to become more self-sufficient, and the powers that be, through laws, rules, regulations, they are basically squelching the efforts. And one example I've used on the air many times is a 14-acre property in South L.A. People of all backgrounds, all skin pigmentation shades and genders and religions came together, and they had this gorgeous garden that this wealthy guy donated to the community. And he said that you could use it. Well, apparently he got some flack from the powers that be behind the scenes, and he had to pull the stakes on all these people. He bulldozed everybody's garden. It was a documentary. Those of you who are listening to this in South L.A., kudos to you. Get people together, even if you are urban or suburban, and think about creating community gardens. Think about asking people to donate land, and maybe you can pay them in, say, produce in lieu of money. Think about barter. Think about outside the box. But having land right now with what's coming, again, financially, economically, socially, and politically, I think is so absolutely important. And, Bob, in your community, put some ads on the Internet, put some ads in the paper, put some index cards in supermarkets. Try to get a podium where you can get a database together of like-minded individuals and buy a piece of land. Because if 90% of people live urban, suburban, and like you, 60 to 70% of Americans are renters, I think there's a lot of interest, at least curiosity, to hear about a plan of action. Bob?
Yeah, I've tried putting out some feelers, but haven't had much results. That's why I'm calling in here, because I know there's a lot of people would be thinking the same that are listening into the program. So then get a hold of me.
So let's do it this way, Bob. Let's use USA Prepares Instructor's email address for this purpose. So, class, if you're interested, if you live in Michigan, Bob, where in Michigan? Can you give us a
pretty much central of the Lower Peninsula, but I've looked all over this. Anywhere from the middle of the state on up. There's a lot of land that's available pretty reasonably.
Okay, so Bob,
north,
you have
further north. Go ahead.
You have an internet-based business. You can sell all over the world. So what we're looking for is, if you're interested in participating with us, we'll use the email address instructor@USA Prepares, instructor@USA.com, and put your name and your address. It's only going to me, okay? And I'll share it with Bob. So ultimately he will get it. He's been calling in for years. He has a company that manufactures vintage speaker grills for speaker systems like JBL and I believe Serwin Vega and Altec Lansing and so forth. And so if you're interested, you can contact me at instructor@USA Prepares. I will pass that information on to Bob. It won't go worldwide. It'll just go to Bob. So please indicate your phone number and where you are, and he will contact you. Bob, please do the same. Send me your contact information, so I'll have that on my Rolodex. I do not store anything in the cloud. I don't store it on my computers. It's in my Rolodex, a manual, old-fashioned, antique, vintage Rolodex. So instructor at usaprepares.com. And please put Bob on the subject line, okay, for all of you interested. And I can separate it that way. Okay.
Yeah, they don't necessarily have to know anything about what I do. I mean, and the particular product that I make, because I've got other things too. I've got this workbench kit I've developed too, which can be manufactured easily too. So there's plenty of room for a lot of other ideas too.
So what I'm hearing, class, is us helping us. It's a win-win situation for everybody. And let's see if we can pull this off. Bob, is there anything else you want to share with us?
Well, maybe I'll... you were talking about cars. Yeah, I've got something I wanted to mention, too, maybe after the break here.
Sure. Bob's going to hold through the break. Rich Sheben's with us. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. Bob in Michigan. Bob, you wanted to mention something about cars, automobiles?
Yeah, I saw a video on YouTube. This guy was running his truck on just gasoline fumes. What do you know about that idea?
You're talking about cracking gasoline at a high temperature to improve miles per gallon. Charles in Ohio has been talking about that kind of a technology, and I met many years ago, probably in late 1990s, I met Paul Pantone, who had done the same thing, and I saw this. And so what he did was he was heating gasoline before it was used for combustion by making a heat exchanger around the exhaust system. So he used the high temperature of the exhaust to...
yeah, well, this guy wasn't even doing that. He was just using the fumes coming off of he had a tank of gas, a container of it, sitting up by the, up besides the radiator. And he was just pulling the fume. He was just taking the fumes right off that came off the gasoline. I don't think he was heating it in any way. Feeding it to the carburetor on his truck, and it shows a video. He drives it around the block.
Well, it sounds like it's very similar in concept, because typically what we're doing is we are spraying through a fuel injection system gasoline, and it is not fully mixing with the air. You still have unburned fuel. And what you're talking about doing is using the vapor, which is easily mixed with air, so there's a greater potential for the fuel to be used for combustion. Makes a lot of sense, and I believe the idea of heating the fuel to a higher temperature, which of course is extremely dangerous, to a higher temperature will make it more volatile and more explosive. So you can get more miles per gallon doing that. I haven't done that. I've experimented in the 1970s with my old race car by trying to mix air and fuel better. I tried using screens and having the air run through screens and increase turbulence. I've changed the fuel air mixture to a smaller percentage of gasoline compared to air. I've used water injection to vaporize water to increase the combustion pressure. And, I've done a lot of things. I have not done that, what you're talking about. But it sure makes a lot of sense to me. It really does. And I'll ask Charles Mundy, he's probably listening to the broadcast right now, if he will come on near and talk about gasoline vapor as a better way of increasing miles per gallon, and what limitations of doing so are. If you think about it, we're all crazy anyway, because we're riding around with, on average, 10 gallons of highly explosive volatile liquid in a tank that can be ruptured on impact and burn us all alive. It's crazy what we're doing, but yet we do it anyway. And not only that, we put that within, our fuel lines within a foot maybe, or 18 inches of a catalytic converter, which is running, between minimum of 600 degrees Fahrenheit to maybe 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit. we've lost our minds. Which is one reason why a diesel vehicle makes a lot of sense. Because diesel fuel is less combustible than gasoline. And it's pretty unlikely that you will see an explosion with diesel fuel as compared with gasoline. So I don't have the complete answer to your question, but Charles would, and we'll get him on the air and he can address that. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'll send you a link to the this video so you can check it out yourself.
That sounds wonderful. So, class, if you're interested in operating a business cooperatively, if you're interested in talking to Bob about some opportunities in his business and expansion of his business in Michigan, and we're talking about the Central Lower Peninsula in Michigan, instructor at usaprepares.com. Instructor at usaprepares.com. Bob, thank you so much for joining us today. Rich Scheben, thank you for spending 2 hours with us today and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with our class.
Always a pleasure, Vince.
Thank you so much, Rich Scheben. Last above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.